Hey everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alison Morris and I am with Full Potential Parenting. I am a certified EFT practitioner, and I'll explain more about what EFT is in a minute, but I wanted to also just put out a disclaimer that I am not a mental health practitioner, social worker, psychologist, sleep specialist, anything like that. But I do a lot of reading on a lot of different issues, and I am also just very impressed with how EFT can be useful in a whole range of contexts. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to explain a little bit more about EFT and how it works and how to do it. And then I'm going to teach you and walk you through some different ways we can use EFT, how we can use it on ourselves as parents, how we can teach our kids how to do it, and then how we can do something called surrogate tapping, which is when we tap on ourselves on behalf of our children, which can be another really neat way to use EFT and get great results. So, EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. Is also often referred to as tapping because you use your fingertips to literally tap on acupressure points on your face and your upper body. I have to show you that one a little bit more, but we'll get to all the points in just a little bit. It's called emotional freedom techniques because it allows us to be free from emotions that we've been hanging on to with intensity, so that we are still feeling them in our bodies. We haven't allowed ourselves to feel them, to express them, and to release them. So EFT is wonderful at, especially for those of us who have what I call challenging children, to allow ourselves to first sort of acknowledge how we're feeling about difficult things that we're dealing with in our lives, and in particular with our kids. It gives us permission to allow ourselves to feel those feelings. You may have heard the phrase, what you resist persists. And another kind of corollary to that is you've got to feel it to heal it. And too often we get trained in this as kids. Often we're trained that it's not acceptable, not okay to feel what we're feeling. We're told that we should stop crying, go to your room until you can be pleasant, all those things. Now, of course, there's different ways to express our feelings, and it's okay to feel angry, but then if you're yelling and shouting at your kids, that maybe is not the best way to express that anger. Nonetheless, we want to find healthy ways to allow ourselves to feel and allow our emotions to move through us. So in the sleep context in particular, I think, we can feel all sorts of things. We can be feeling completely exasperated. We can be feeling kind of hopeless about the whole thing. We might just be feeling completely exhausted if we're not getting enough sleep. And I will confess, I'm sort of in that boat today. It doesn't matter what the feeling is, what the emotion is, we can still work through it with EFT. EFT is used increasingly around the world in all sorts of contexts. It's used to help people kind of move through emotions, especially big memories, a lot of trauma memories. It can be really useful for that, although there are very specific techniques for working with people with what we'd call big T traumas. So I would not advise that you tackle that on your own. It is very useful to use around phobias. It's useful around things like cravings for food. There's been a whole lot of studies done on the efficacy of EFT around weight loss and reducing cravings and things like that. It's used by the VA now increasingly to help veterans with PTSD. It's been used to assist victims of civil wars, of natural disasters like earthquakes and the tsunami, say in Indonesia. And it's been used a lot to help survivors in, say, Newtown, Connecticut, and down in Florida at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School after school shootings. So, and then a lot of athletes use it to increase their performance and reduce their worries about how they're going to do in a big game or a big match. So you may have seen it like during the Olympics. I think there were a couple of clips of athletes tapping before a big competition. It can be used to help people reduce their fear of speaking in public or arguing in a courtroom, whatever the case may be. So it's extremely flexible. So once you learn how to use it, you can apply it in other areas of your life. Okay, so EFT is sometimes called acupuncture without needles. And this is because where we tap, these acupressure points are many of the same points that where a needle might be inserted in acupuncture. And these points are points on what are called meridians. Meridians are rivers of energy that flow through our bodies that the Chinese identified several thousand years ago. And they are, many of them start in our feet and run up to our head, and they run past and are associated with major organs. So there's the kidney meridian, the bladder meridian, the stomach meridian, the heart meridian. There's a gallbladder one, and there's even one that's called the triple warmer meridian, which is one that's really important for us to know about because it is the meridian that governs the fight-flight response or is associated with it. EFT only sort of taps into certain of those meridians, and the theory is that somehow EFT allows us to kind of restore the flow of energy through our body. From a more Western scientific perspective, a number of studies have been done that show that after you have tapped for a very short while, I mean, maybe 15 minutes or so, and in fact, it may even be less, that cortisol levels drop in your body. So, of course, cortisol is a big stress hormone, and most of us are carrying around way too much of it all the time. And our kids are as well, I would imagine. EFT, importantly, has also been shown to disrupt the triggers from our amygdalas. So the amygdala is the part of our brain, it's part of our lower brain that detects threat and sends the signals to the rest of our body that we need to fight or we need to flee, or in some cases that we need to shut down entirely. That's the freeze response. Now, in most of our kids, of course, their amygdalas are overactive, so they perceive threat mistakenly where threat does not actually exist. And that is, I think, a key as well for why bedtime can be so difficult for our children, but more on that later. So this is, of course, huge because if we can disrupt that signal, then we give our nervous system a chance to recalibrate and start to recognize that, in fact, the world is not as scary and dangerous and life-threatening as many of our kids have, their brains have been trained to believe. Another thing that EFT has been shown to do is that it affects our brainwave states, and it places us into a light meditative state. And I can't remember what brainwave that's associated with. It's not alpha. It might be, no, delta. Shoot, I think it might be theta, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember the brainwave state off the top of my head. And EFT has also been shown to increase heart rate variability. If you're not familiar with the work of the Heart Math Institute, they have just a ton of research over 30 years or so that shows the importance of heart rate variability in helping to regulate our nervous system. And so EFT helps us get into heart coherence. Now, the other cool thing about all of that, right, is that we know that our brains and our hearts are electromagnetic forces. And so that our energetic states are sort of contagious. And so to the extent that we can get heart rate coherence going in our own bodies, and we can get our own brains in a calm state, that can then be something that our children can entrain to, so that they can adopt our own energetic state for themselves. Now, our hearts do that better than our brains. Our hearts are something like 5,000 times more powerful from an electromagnetic point of view than our brains are. So if you have to choose one, focus on your heart. In any case, okay, so how do we do EFT? EFT is very simple to learn, but many people get really caught up in some of the steps, and I'm going to try to help you get around some of this so that you feel comfortable doing it on your own, because it was designed really to be a self-help technique. Although I will say, of course, I am an EFT practitioner. I'm always happy to work with people individually, and people tell me all the time how much more they get out of a session when they work with me than when they've done it on their own. And that's, I think, a fairly typical kind of realization, that because, of course, somebody else can recognize patterns that you have. And sometimes it's nice to just be able to sort of follow along and not have to sort of figure out what you're going to say on your own. But leaving that aside, always when you're doing EFT, and this is one reason why EFT is very powerful, is that you are focused on what you are feeling in your body. So you always want to start with what your issue is, what your problem is, what you're wanting to focus on, trying to release or resolve. And to the extent possible, you want to feel where that is living in your body. Now, many of us, just like we were taught not to feel our emotions, we're taught to disconnect from our body sensations. And so that can be a little tricky for some of us. And some people do it beautifully. They know instantly that they're feeling like a tightness in their chest, or they know that they've got something, they've got tension in their neck or shoulders, or a not feeling in the pit of their stomach, and that's great. Others of us really struggle with identifying where we're feeling things. So I just invite you to be sort of gentle with yourself, but give yourself some time to just sit quietly sometimes and notice, pay attention to what you're feeling in your body, because our bodies are always talking to us, always telling us how they're doing. And of course, anytime that we're not feeling 100%, that's our body's way of telling us something needs adjusting, something needs a little bit of attention, a little bit of maybe modification in what we're eating or our sleep habits or whatever, or even our emotional state. So let's pretend we're really, really, really frustrated that our kids won't let us, they won't stay in their own beds, and they're sleeping in our beds with us. Personal experience with this one. So again, I want you to just notice, where do you feel that? And how intensely do you feel that frustration? So maybe, you want to think back to maybe just last night. Maybe it was last weekend. Maybe this has been going on for years and you're just at the end of your rope. Whatever your situation is, feel into the frustration that your child will not sleep on their own. And I want you to give that a rating on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is you're not bothered by it at all, you could care less, and 10 is you're just pulling your hair out, you can't take it any longer. And this is called your subjective unit of distress, or SUD level. And this is what allows us to test whether the EFT tapping that we're doing has been successful after the fact. Although I will say that EFT sometimes doesn't work immediately. Sometimes the effects kind of become more apparent after time. So don't be too discouraged if it's not an immediate release for you, although many people do feel better right after doing the tapping. It's also quite common while you're tapping to yawn, sigh. If it's a really emotional issue, crying is certainly not out of the question. And those are all great. That's all a sign that you are releasing energy from your body. So don't be scared of those sensations. If you can't talk any longer because you're crying, if something's really upsetting to you, that's fine. Just keep tapping. It calms your nervous system down, and just allow it. If you try again to just, if you don't resist what you're feeling, the chances are much better that you will move through it more quickly. And if you fight it and you are determined you are not going to feel what you're feeling, then the chances are much higher that you're going to hold on to it a whole lot longer. So Okay, so you have your rating on our frustration, and what we're going to do is go to the side of the hand. You can use either hand, and you're going to tap with, 3, 4 fingers on this point while we say a setup phrase 3 times. And the setup phrase is a statement of the problem that goes like this: even though I have this, fill in the blank, I have this frustration that my child will not sleep on her own. And then we say affirmation. The standard affirmation in EFT is, I deeply and completely accept myself. Now, you may say, that's crazy. One, I don't really feel like I accept myself right now. Or like, I'm feeling like a lousy parent, so that doesn't feel true. Some people literally cannot get those words out of their mouth. If those words don't feel comfortable to you, or they feel silly or whatever, change them up. Just say, I acknowledge that that's how I'm feeling, or I accept myself in the way I feel, or I forgive myself for being so frustrated, or I'm willing to try to accept myself. So there's all sorts of ways that you can change that up depending on how you're feeling and sometimes what we're tapping on. But I'm going to use the standard phrase today just so you start to hear that and get used to it. All right, so we say this 3 times. So that was 1 time. Let's go 2 more times. Even though I feel this frustration that my child will not sleep on her own, I deeply and completely accept myself. And 1 more time. Again, just repeat after me. Even though I have this frustration, and you could say, and I feel it in my shoulders, that my child will not sleep by herself. And change it up. If it's a boy, it's a, whatever you need to do to make it fit for your child. I deeply and completely accept myself. And then we're going to do just 1 tapping round. We start at the top of the head. This is what's called the basic recipe, right at the crown of your head. You can use all 5 fingers, but you don't need to tap very hard. And you tap 5, 7, 9 times, as long as it takes you to get in a few good taps and to repeat what's called a reminder phrase. And the reminder phrase can be as simple as this frustration. Then we go to the eyebrow point. So tip of your eyebrow closest to the bridge of your nose, and you can tap on either side. You can use 2 fingers and tap both together. You can use 2 hands and alternate. People use it in all sorts of ways. Any way is fine. This frustration, side of the eye, just gently, this frustration. Under the eye, on that bone, this frustration. Gently, right under the nose and a little indent, this frustration. This is called the chin point, but it's really between the chin and the lower lip, this frustration. Collarbone point, this one can be a little tricky to find, so you want to, follow your collarbones and then kind of go over and down into that notch area there. And if you're worried about hitting that, I like to take all 5 fingers and just go across the whole area. Some people just use the palm of their hand and tap like this across that area. This point often makes me yawn. This frustration. And the final point, this one's the oddest looking one. It's under our arm, about 4 inches under your armpit. I'm raising my arm up here, about where your bra strap would cross for a woman. Now the other way you can do it is curl your hand up underneath and tap there. This frustration. And that's what's called 1 round of tapping. It's often best just to do 1 round and then pause, take a big breath in, and then check in to see how you feel. And again, I'm yawning again now. You also, I forgot to leave myself a glass of water, but it's not a bad idea to have a glass of water nearby while you're tapping, right? Water helps conduct energy. We're mostly water. We're all mostly dehydrated anyway, so drinking water is great. Check in with yourself. Have you noticed that your level of intensity, that your level of frustration has decreased in any way? Now, it may not have. We may not have done enough tapping, and that's fine. But for a lot of people, just that 1 round of tapping is enough to feel a little bit better. Maybe it's not a 7 anymore. Maybe it's a 6, or maybe even it's a 5. And what happens then often too is that our emotions shift when we tap. So we might not be so frustrated anymore. Now maybe we're feeling, I don't know, now maybe we're mad at ourselves that we ever allowed our child to sleep in the bed to begin with. So you just want to be a little bit careful about chasing through your emotions until you've got one tapped down. But if the frustration is just not the, the emotion of the moment any longer, just let that go and shift to whatever the one that is most prominent for you right now is. What I would suggest, though, is that you try to stick to sort of one thing at a time. And another tip is to be as specific as possible. So right now we're tapping sort of on the general concept of being frustrated, but it would be more useful to tap on a specific incident of your child, say climbing into bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and waking you up. Now, another tip is that you always want to be rating your intensity level based on how you are feeling about something right now in the present moment. So not, I was so angry last night or early this morning when my child climbed into bed with me, but how, as you're thinking about that incident right now, how are you feeling? So always judge it in the present moment. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, you told me we were going to talk about like how to do this with our kids, and I will. Again, really important to sort of care for our own emotional states before we try to sort of get our kids to shift there. So always sort of tend to yourself first. This is especially important when we're going to do surrogate tapping, because we can't be very effective at surrogate tapping if we're still bothered by the thing that we're tapping on for our kids. I'll explain more about that in a little bit. So that's generally how you tap. Now, if you want to teach your kids how to do this, that is a really beautiful thing, because children, of course, have all sorts of anxieties about all sorts of things. Even normal neurotypical kids have lots of worries and stresses from their day-to-day lives. But our kids, and in particular adopted kids, have a whole other set of issues going on. Most of them were traumatized by their adoption. They may have been abused. They may have been neglected. Their nervous systems have been out of whack probably for years. They may have had a lot of in utero stress from their birth mothers, who I would imagine for the most part, although I don't want to generalize necessarily, knew while they were carrying their children that they would not be able to keep them, and that they would have to place them for adoption, and all sorts of documented evidence showing the effects of maternal stress and cortisol on the developing fetus brain. So our kids have a particular challenge, right? They tend to think of the world as against them. They may have all sorts of attachment issues, and this translates into especially sleep. Because what happens when you sleep, right? You lose control, you become really vulnerable, and you're not with your parent any longer. So the attachment issues are huge. Now, interestingly, a woman was listening to an interview with a social worker recently talking about the 4 main issues that she sees kids deal with when it comes to sleep. And again, these were not necessarily special needs or adopted kids. These were just sort of run-of-the-mill kids. And the 4 issues were fear of things. So, right, the monster under the bed, the boogeyman in the closet, the doll that's going to come alive, that kind of thing. Racing mind, right? The thoughts we can't turn off, worries about tomorrow, thinking back about, ruminating about what happened earlier in the day, that kind of thing. The fear of not being able to sleep. So if you've had trouble in the past, then you're worried about it's not going to happen again tonight. I'm going to be laying awake all night, all that kind of stuff. I think adults have that real issue as well. And the other one is dying. Now, for our children, I think there are 2 parts of this. One, I think our children, and this may not be a conscious belief, right? May not know this, although some kids may. They may not know that they're scared of dying when they fall asleep, but their subconscious believes that they might die when they fall asleep. And again, there's the control issue, right? So how many of our kids didn't have their needs met when they were infants? And so they have learned to try to control everything in their lives because they can't trust the adults in their lives to care for them and meet their needs. And so falling asleep is incredibly scary because they have to give up that control. They become helpless and vulnerable. And then the other aspect of this with our kids with big attachment issues is they're scared that we're going to die while they're sleeping and they'll never see us again. So there's a lot going on there. Now, I'm not suggesting that you want to teach your kids how to tap on their fear of dying while they're sleeping. I'm not sure that would be a really great approach, but you can teach them how to tap so that they can maybe release some of these other fears. And then with surrogate tapping, we can maybe address some of these big picture, really unconscious beliefs that our kids have. So if you're going to teach your kids how to tap, I would certainly tap along with them. If they'll allow you to, and depending on their age, you might actually tap on them. So use your hands to tap on their heads, all the points. Although I will say, depending on how ticklish your child is, this part can be tickly and this under the arm can be tickly. Although again, we're not talking about the armpit, but still they can be really sensitive. If you need to, you can just use fingertips and just touch the points instead of tapping, and that might make it less ticklish. And if you need to, you can just skip the points that your kids are really sensitive to, right? Because we're not trying to we're certainly not trying to get them giggling. Although if they start giggling as a release from the tapping, that's one thing, but we don't want the tapping itself to make them laugh. The other thing that you wouldn't want to adjust when you're tapping with your kids, though, is the setup phrase and the affirmation. Well, so maybe not the setup phrase, but you might just let them come up with it. Something really simple, like even though, I don't know, Sophia was really mean to me at school today, but you're not going to say I deeply and completely accept myself. Now, maybe with teens, if they're willing to learn how to do this, that might work. But for kids, you can use something much simpler, like I'm still a really great kid, or I know my mom loves me, or it's all going to be okay, something like that. And sometimes even for kids, you don't even need to go through the whole setup phrase. You can just start tapping. And you might even just say, tell me about what happened with Sophia on the playground or over lunch or, on the halls, between class or gym, whatever the case is. And just have your child tap while they tell you the story. And that in itself might be enough. Or maybe they're really worried about the test tomorrow. I'm going to screw it up. I'm not going to remember anything. I'm afraid my mind will go blank. I'm sure, Billy's going to do better than I am. I don't want to go to school tomorrow because they're going to give me that quiz and I haven't studied and I feel really stupid. Whatever they need to say, you can just go with that. Now, if you want, of course, and again, this depends on your child. You have to know your child, their age, their maturity level, whatever. Again, if you want to try to use the intensity level, they may not say, well, I'm a 5. I'm feeling 5 on the anxiety scale. But you might ask, especially a younger kid, like, wow, how scared are you of the test or of the track meet tomorrow, whatever the case may be, and just have them use their hands to adjust where they're feeling it. I feel it this much. I'm like this scared. And again, it could be about something specifically like in their room that's got them scared. But my guess is, if they have a doll that's freaking them out, you've probably taken that doll out of their room. But if it's, they're afraid of a monster under the bed, they're this afraid of that, I'm afraid that monster's going to get me. He's going to jump out in the middle of the night. But allow your kid to come up with the words. You don't want to suggest them necessarily to your child. And if it's, I neglected to mention a really important point with EFT, which is, by and large, we tap on the negative. So, right, we're tapping on the problem itself, and we're using words that sometimes feel to people like we're reinforcing what the problem is. But what we're doing, in fact, is sort of acknowledging, again, that we have those feelings so that we can release them. But then sometimes it's nice to sort of shift it up. After you feel better about something, then you can maybe switch it around with your kids. So you're not ending on like, I'm really scared of the thing in the closet. It's going to come out in the middle of the night and get me or something. You can say, but I know my mommy's right down the hall, and I've got my dog sleeping right next to me. And, we've sprayed it with a monster spray, and I'm going to get a really great night's sleep. And so you can play around with a little bit. Again, sort of depending on the mood of your child and their age. And I'm just going to, I'm sorry, I can't tell the time. I'm going to pause to see how I'm doing here. Okay. So what, some of that might help, again, with the sort of day-to-day anxiety, with the fears that your child can enunciate, can talk about, and is willing to talk about. And you know what? You don't even necessarily need to talk. If you can just get your child to do a little bit of tapping, even if they can't tell you what's wrong, if they'll just tap or you can tap on them, that will help too. And the same thing is true for you. If you just cannot come up with what words you want to say or what the issue is, you just know you don't feel right, you're really sad or depressed or something, you just, like, it's too much to come up with the words, just tap. Just tap. And then you might feel yourself sigh, you might feel yourself yawn, and just do it for, do it for a few rounds, do it for 5 minutes. And it can just help calm things down, take the edge off, kind of just turn things around a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit then about surrogate tapping. This one's a little weird, but really cool. So surrogate tapping is technically a form of distance energy healing, where you tap on yourself on behalf of someone else. Now, in the case of our kids, it may be that we're maybe not right next to them if we're going to do this really deep tapping, say on their fear of dying or their fear of our dying. But they might be in the next room, but it doesn't matter. You could be on a business trip, you could be on vacation, and you get a call from your mother who's caring for your child that, she's beside herself and inconsolable. You can tap for your child no matter where you are in the world. And there are numerous stories about this being extremely effective. Now, there has not been, for the science-minded people, a whole lot of studies on surrogate tapping specifically, but there have been a whole lot of studies on distance healing in general, on the power of prayer, on the power of group-focused intention. And again, the distance between the subject and the healer, or the one sending the healing energy, is immaterial. And the thought is that this is due to something called quantum entanglement, which is a principle that states essentially that energy that's once been connected is always connected. And it doesn't matter how far apart it is. So whether you believe that or not, I'd still urge you to give it a try, because I've seen some really profound results with surrogate tapping. And when there aren't any other obvious explanations for why a situation would change or improve dramatically. So really what you're doing when you're doing surrogate tapping is you're offering healing to someone else. There are some people who get a little squirmy. They feel like you have to ask permission in order to do this from the subject before you begin. I don't feel that's necessary. You don't ask permission to pray for somebody, right? You're praying, you're hoping that something happens that is for their highest good, that will be of benefit to them. And my personal belief is that as long as our intentions are for their highest good, that their higher self, their soul, their energy, whatever, will either decide or be able to accept our healing energy, or it won't. They won't. So our children will either be receptive to this or they won't, but that we can do them no harm, and it's worth a try. So with surrogate tapping, again, the first thing you really want to do is you want to set the intention that you are, again, offering this for your child's highest good. And there's a couple ways that you can do surrogate tapping. Probably the easiest way to do it is to simply pretend or imagine that you are your child. And what you're going to do is, again, you may not know what's specifically going on for your child, but you can guess. And as their parent, you probably have a pretty good idea. And as an informed parent who's maybe done a lot of research, again, you may have a pretty good idea of what's going on internally, unconsciously, or subconsciously, I should say. So, for instance, if we were going to do some tapping on this fear of dying, we would, again, we'd pause and we would intend for this to be for the benefit of our child. And then we would do our tapping as though we are our child. So go to the side of the hand and we'd do a setup phrase that would go, depending on the issue, but on the dying issue, something like this. Even though it really scares me to sleep by myself because I'm afraid I might die when I'm asleep, I'm a really great kid. Even though I hate to sleep by myself because I'm scared I'm never going to wake up, so I have to sleep with mama or daddy. I'm a really awesome kid. Even though I refuse to sleep by myself because it's way too scary and I'm afraid I might never wake up, I know I'm going to be okay. Now, I changed those words up a little bit each time. You can say the same thing 3 times in a row, that's fine. And then we go to the top of our head. Sleeping by myself is so scary. Eyebrow point. I'm afraid I might die. Side of the eye. I can't sleep by myself. Under the eye. I'm afraid I might die while I'm sleeping. Under the nose. It's too scary to sleep by myself. Chin point. I'm afraid I might die if I'm sleeping by myself. Collarbone. If I don't sleep with my parents, I'm afraid I'll never wake up. Under the arm. It's too scary to sleep by myself. Take a big breath in and out. Now, of course, if we're doing surrogate tapping, we're guessing as well on whether the intensity level has dropped or whether our child needs more tapping on that particular issue. And on an issue as complicated as fearing death or being afraid that we're going to die, it's probably going to take more than 1 round. But you might just do that for 5 minutes and you might think about maybe there's little things they've told you that they've sort of, that they don't realize indicate how scared they are about going to sleep at night. Or maybe you've got no idea what the heck's going on. So let's try this too. You can do this as well. You don't always have to know what's going on. So side of the hand. And again, sometimes it helps to switch up. If you're right, like I'm right-handed, so I tap a lot with my right hand. Sometimes it's helpful to switch. Shake things up a little bit. Even though I have no idea why it's so hard for me to sleep by myself. I just know I can't do it when I'm by myself. I'm still a really awesome kid. Even though they keep asking me why I can't go to sleep on my own in my room, and I don't know why, and I wish they'd stop asking me. I'm going to be okay. Even though all I know is I have to sleep with my parents or I can't fall asleep. And I wish I could sleep by myself because I want to feel like a big kid. I'm going to be okay. Top of the head. I don't know why I can't sleep by myself. I can't sleep by myself. I don't know why, but I'm scared to sleep by myself. I want to be able to sleep by myself, but I can't do it. I can't sleep on my own. It's too scary to sleep on my own. I can't sleep on my own. And again, you can just mix up those things. So there's never something you can't tap on. And if you sort of feel like something isn't working, just shift it up. You can always, again, you can move it up a level. Even though I have no idea what's bothering me, but I just feel awful. I'm sorry you do that with the setup phrase. Or even though I'm just completely overwhelmed and I don't even know where to start with tapping. So one of the things people get really concerned about when they're not used to tapping is they say, well, I don't know what words to say. And that's almost the least important part of the process. Just use your own words, whatever you're feeling at the time. And if you get, again, you don't have to change up a lot of words all the time and get super fancy about it. If it's just, something like, even though I just feel like crap and I don't want to feel this way anymore. I deeply and completely accept myself. That works. That's okay. A few other sort of tips when you're tapping. Sometimes we need to give ourselves permission to let something go. So our egos are really, and our subconscious mind are really concerned with the status quo and keeping us safe. And that means no change. And so often we have a conception of who we are. We have beliefs that we have believed for so long, we don't even know we believe them. And it's almost too difficult to think of who we might be if we didn't believe that thing any longer. And we need to purposely, consciously give ourselves permission to let that belief go, or let that feeling go, or let that emotion go. So sometimes you can use that like as an affirmation instead. So even though, and we might try this if we're surrogate tapping on our kids, even though I've slept with my parents for so long, I don't know what it would be like to sleep by myself. But you could say a number of things like, it's safe for me to sleep by myself. Or I give myself permission to not be scared when I'm sleeping by myself. Or I allow myself to release the fear of sleeping by myself. So there's all sorts of ways that you can use these to just, again, try to, what you're doing when you're tapping, you're sort of talking to your subconscious, right? And our subconscious mind controls about 95, if not more, % of everything we do and say and how we behave every single day. And so it's one reason why, right, willpower alone. So our kids may want desperately to go sleep in their own room and feel like a big kid and not feel like a baby and feel independent and grown up and all that sort of thing. And you can certainly do tapping on all those feelings if you think that's part of what's going on. I lost my train of thought. Willpower alone is usually insufficient. It's why people have trouble smoking. It's stopping smoking. It's why people can't lose weight. It's why they stay in, relationships that are bad for them. It's why we can't just suddenly, start behaving differently when we're in a really difficult relationship, right? Because we develop these patterns and then we get stuck in ruts. And part of that is neural pathways in our brain, and some of it is just subconscious programming. It's like, well, this is the way things are, and this is the way things are always going to be. And so EFT allows us to talk sort of to our subconscious mind and get and shake things up in there a little bit. I want to just tell you one more thing about tapping, and then I think I'm going to wrap this up. Oh, and then I'm going to give you a couple more just tips about other ways to just sort of calm their bodies down that, would work for you too if you're having trouble sleeping. Oh God, I forgot. I totally lost my train of thought here. Oh, worst case scenario. So this one might work for you. Like if you're feeling totally stuck and you just like, again, you're just so super frustrated, you're super exhausted, you think this is never going to change, tap on that. Tap on that as though that's true. Even though my child is going to be sleeping with me until I die, I accept myself anyway. Even though I feel like I'm never ever going to get a good night's sleep again the rest of my life, or even though my spouse and I are never going to have any privacy uh, ever again. Exaggerate it, make it the worst case scenario, and do some tapping on that. That can also be a really powerful way to kind of just get things moving, release these stuck emotions. Okay. Feel free, please, to send me questions about this. There's a lot of nuances to tapping, even though the basics are really, really easy. But I hope I've given you a sense of how you can use this to address some sleep issues, how you can teach your kids how to do this, how you can use it for yourself, and then how you can do the surrogate tapping. So feel free to email me with questions. A couple other pointers for helping make it easier for kids to sleep, whether they're sleeping with you, whether they're sleeping in their room, whatever. A drop of lavender on a pillowcase can be really soothing, or if you have an essential oil diffuser, you might put lavender in that at nighttime just to help soothe, calm things down. This one's probably one that many people have tried, but white noise machine can be very calming, or maybe your child likes some music playing, or nature sounds in the background. Might be really like waves, just soothing waves up on the beach. All sorts of stuff now that you can get like on YouTube. There's like hours of this recording. Of course, there's always melatonin. Most people, I think, use way too much melatonin. I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to be giving you medical advice here, but from the reading I've done, most people are giving too much and they don't give it soon enough. So it needs a couple hours to kick in. And of course, melatonin doesn't help your child stay asleep. It only helps them fall asleep. So depending on what the issue is, it may not be useful, but maybe a half a milligram or even less is probably better than certainly like 3 milligrams. And often they come in those bottles with 3 milligrams. Magnesium is, again, very calming, and most of us are deficient. So there are pills, if your kid's fine swallowing pills. There's also a magnesium spray. It's an oil, they call it. It's not really an oil, but you can spray it on like their legs or the bottoms of their feet as they're going to bed, or maybe you rub it into their back. That might be a nice, soothing, calming thing to do as they're going to sleep. And here's another weird one. Putting your legs up against the wall can help regulate your nervous system. I can't remember, there's a name for that pose in yoga. Waterfall, maybe? I can't remember if that's waterfall or not. Anyway, but your kids might do this. Maybe you would come up with a plan, like you guys read a book together, again, depending on the age of your child. And you're both with your feet up against the wall, your legs up against the wall, and your back flat on the bed, and you read a book for a few minutes while you're doing that. And that can also be really soothing and calming. So just a few other sort of tips to throw out there in case those are helpful. Okay, well, I'm going to end it there. Again, sorry the first recording didn't work. I think I actually covered a bit more in this version, this round of the webinar than I did before. But sorry not to do this live with the opportunity for questions, but feel free to email me if you have questions about tapping for yourself, to helping with that with your child, or about surrogate tapping. So thank you so much for joining me, everyone, and welcome you. If you don't follow me on Facebook, we're at Full Potential Parenting on Facebook, and if you are not signed up to my email list, please do that. You can, I think, find that off my Facebook page. Or you can also go to my website. I have a ton of additional tapping resources on my website, which is full-potential-parenting.com. And again, I'm always happy to work individually with anyone. And you can find more information about that on my website as well. It can be a really nice gift to yourself. Again, as you get more comfortable with tapping, that can be a really nice way to kind of go a little bit deeper, a little bit further, and then you can, of course, go off and do more tapping on your own. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope this has been helpful. Please also shoot me an email and let me know what you think about this, and if this is helpful and how it's helped. I would love to hear those stories as well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.